and say welcome again to wherever you are to the San Diego Museum of Art guest lecture series brought to you today by the docents of SDMA. Today's lecture is I Am Here, Telling Our Stories Through Art with the award-winning author and illustrator Brian Selznick. Brian's lecture coincides today with the Young Art 2021 exhibit. It's called Young Art 2021, My World, Our Planet exhibition, and it's at the SDMA. And you'll be able to visit that when it opens next Friday, March 26th. But before I begin, I want to remind you that during the lecture, you'll be able to ask Brian questions in the Zoom chat function. The questions and comments will be curated by Mary Grillo as part of the question and answer portion after Brian's talk. There will not be a docent lecture tour because we're going on a tour inside the head of author, actor, screenwriter, and illustrator Brian Selznick, and through the eyes of some very special students and artists. Today's lecture may actually be a milestone. We think this is the first time in the last 20 years that the Friday lecture series has featured future museum goers, future artists, art historians, and authors, the children of San Diego County. Welcome, kids. We're happy you're here. I also want to take a moment to thank all the individuals who made today's lecture possible. David Miles, Mary Grillo, Marilyn Woods, and Dr. Jim Greville. And a special shout out to Dale Spector, who recommended Brian as a speaker, and Nicole Amaya, San Diego Museum of Art educator in the student programs and curator of the Young Art 2021 exhibition. Thank you, Nicole, for everything you did to facilitate bringing young artists to this program today. My name is Bea Barraza, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Brian Selznick. I've actually known Brian for years now, ever since I picked up his wonderful book, The Invention of Hugo Cabret, and read it to my twin nephews and my niece. We were all transported to another world, and it reminded me, and still does, of the importance of seeing art and learning to read at the same time. Reading a story and seeing the illustrations, it reminds and remains a powerful way of telling a story and navigating the world around you. Brian Selznick is the Caldecott Medal winning creator of New York Times bestsellers, The Invention of Hugo Cabret and Wonderstruck. Brian grew up with his mom, who's here with us, in East Brunswick, his mom and dad, and his brother and sister. He loved to read and draw as a youngster and enjoyed going to art museums and natural history museums. Brian graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design in 1988, and he had a great job at Eeyore's Books for Children on Manhattan's Upper West Side. And it's there that he learned all about children and all about children's books. Through the magic of Zoom, Brian is joining us today from Rome. He and his husband, David Serlin, are living in Italy as Dr. Serlin has been awarded the prestigious Rome Prize in Architecture. Please help me welcome our guest lecturer, Brian Selznick. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Bea, and thank you everybody for joining wherever you are. I'm going to share my screen now, and that way we can all watch together.
And I'll turn it, I gotta make sure.
Here we go. All right, so I'm really thrilled to be able to talk to you today, and I thought that it would be a great place for us to start part one just right away at the San Diego Museum of Art. So I want all of us to imagine that we have gathered at the San Diego Museum of Art, and I'm so thrilled to hear that the museum is actually going to be reopening tomorrow, and I hope a lot of you will be signing up to go and revisit a museum. One of the amazing, one of the things that I most missed during the lockdowns and the shutdowns was being able to go to museums like the San Diego Museum of Art. And remember, as you're walking back into a museum for the first time after a long time, remember all of the people who have to work to make that experience possible for you, not just the security guards who are guarding the art and the people who take your tickets, but the people behind the scenes who you might not see, like the curators who decide what's on display, people like B, who's in education and is looking at all of the ways that she and other people can help bring in students like you, and walk through the galleries and look at the art. And that's something that I think is going to be a really exciting, wonderful thing to do. So I'm sort of thinking about our talk today as if we're all together walking through the galleries of the San Diego Museum of Art, which has collections from all over the world. It's a really, really wonderful collection of paintings and sculptures. And I don't know if a lot of you know very much about museums themselves, but what you see in a museum, even a very, very full museum with a lot of things, they have thousands and thousands of more objects that are not on display that the museum owns, because there's usually not enough room to share everything that a museum owns. I think I read that museums only show sometimes like 10% of what it is that they even own. So imagine all of the things that have been collected, and imagine why all of the art and all of the objects, because it's not always art, right? Sometimes it's objects from history, have been chosen and put on display. And I'm thrilled that this talk is connected with the Young Art exhibition, where young people have made art to this theme, My World, Our Planet. And you'll be able to see the art in real life, but right now you can go online and see some of the art on the computer. And as you can see, even online, so much of this work is really incredible. Each of these students have done really beautiful work with mixed media, paintings, and making things with objects. It's really beautiful. Nevin is a first grader, and she actually had a question that she wanted to ask me.
Why did you want to be an artist?
And so thank you, Nevin, for that question. That's a really good question. And so I thought that would be a good way to lead us into part 2, which is about my drawing and writing and why I wanted to be an artist. So when I was about your age, Nevin, maybe a little bit older, this is me. And I already used to draw all the time. I love drawing and making things. This was a drawing that I did when I was 10 years old. It's a copy of an angel that I loved from a painting by Leonardo da Vinci, who also painted the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. And I like to draw angels, but when I got a little bit older, what I really liked to draw was monsters. And so I drew a lot of monsters, and that was really fun. But my teachers encouraged me, my parents encouraged me, thank you, Mom, and thank you, Dad. And it really meant a lot to me that they saw that I loved to do this, and they helped me get lessons after school, and they always helped to encourage me. And so I think it's really important that we find something that we really love and then pursue it in whatever way that we can. This is Lorenzo, he's 9, he has a question for me as well.
Did you love reading as a kid? What kind of books did you like most?
Well, thank you, Lorenzo. That is a very good question. These are some of my favorite books when I was a kid. The Dead Bird, which is about kids who find a dead bird, and it's really, really good. Arm in Arm, Mother, Mother, I Feel Sick, Send for the Doctor, Quick, Quick, Quick. Hand Talk, which is where I learned about sign language, and it teaches you the beginning of the sign language alphabet. 13, which tells 13 different stories on every page. And my favorite, fortunately, where every time you turn the page, a new surprising thing happens. So on one page it says, one day you got invited to a surprise party, and then you turn the page, but unfortunately the party was in Florida and he was in New York. And then you turn the page and it says, fortunately, a friend loaned him an airplane. And it goes from black and white to color, and it's very exciting every time you turn the page. And if you look at the names on the covers of all of these books, I think you'll see the name Remy Charlip. Sometimes he wrote and illustrated the book. Sometimes he illustrated it with another writer. Sometimes he co-wrote it. But I had all of these books when I was a kid, and I loved all of them. And if you don't know any of these books, or if you're a teacher and you're looking for, or a parent or a kid looking for a great book to read, or an artist just wanting to know what children's books can be, I recommend all of these books. And so I grew up, I went to college, I ended up getting a job at Eeyore's Books for Children, which is where I really did learn all about children's books. And I used to paint the windows for all the different holidays. And so this, of course, was our Christmas window. Not really, it's our Halloween window. But I was working here when my first book was published, The Houdini Box. And tomorrow is the 30th anniversary of my very first book. And so when I was making this book, I was working at that store. This book was actually based on a project that I did in college. So it was a school assignment. So if you're in school right now and you are working on your assignments, don't throw anything away because you never know what might happen. Because I never thought that my school assignment was going to turn into my first book. And then 30 years later, I would still be making books. And now I also get to make movies and all sorts of other things that we're going to talk about as well. So everything for me really began with the Houdini Box. My boss, Steve Geck at Eeyore's Books for Children, and his then girlfriend, now wife, Diana Blau, who at the time worked at Random House, helped me get the book published, helped me bring it to an editor, Ann Schwartz. And this is where it all started. So I am really happy to share this book with you and to let you know that tomorrow is this big anniversary. And so I went on and I did a lot of other books, including a lot of picture book biographies that were true stories about people. Most of these stories I didn't really know until the authors offered to have me illustrate these stories. This is about Amelia Earhart and Eleanor Roosevelt, who were actually friends. Amelia Earhart was one of the first female pilots. And this is a book about the opera singer Marian Anderson, when Marian sang. Both of these are by Pam Munoz-Ryan. And Marian Anderson was the first Black singer to sing a lead role at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. This is a book called The Dinosaurs of Waterhouse Hawkins, which is about the man who basically built and imagined the first life-size dinosaurs when people didn't really know what dinosaurs were, what they looked like. And this is a book about the poet Walt Whitman, and talks about his entire life and how he wrote about America and how he wrote about soldiers. And these were all really, really exciting books to work on. But after I worked on them for a while, I started feeling a little frustrated. I didn't really know what else to do. And I just got a little bit stuck. Cece has a question for me.
What or who inspired your art the most?
So Cece, that is a very good question. What or who inspired my art the most? And the answer to this question actually has a lot to do with what happened after I made the books I just showed you. So besides Remy Charlip, who made the books I showed you already, the author who really inspired me the most is Maurice Sendak. This is Maurice Sendak and his dog Herman. And you might know his name, especially from books like Where the Wild Things Are, In the Night Kitchen, Outside Over There. And I didn't actually know his books when I was a kid, but I heard about them because they were very famous. And I read them for the first time when I was working at Eeyore's Books for Children. And I really deeply fell in love with them. And they became a very big influence on me and on the types of books that I wanted to make. And I eventually met Maurice Sendak and we became friends. And I was telling him about how frustrated I was and I didn't really know what I wanted to do next. I had made a lot of books that were nonfiction that were interesting. And I had done other books too that were fiction, but I just wasn't sure what to do next. And Maurice said to me something that I think is very good advice that we can all take to heart, which was make the book you want to make. And that could also mean, do the thing you most want to do. What is the book, for me, what is the book I most wanted to make? And that really got me thinking. And it made me remember that many years ago, I had seen the movie A Trip to the Moon, the silent film by George Méliès. And it was made in 1902. It was the first science fiction movie ever made. And I always thought that would be a good movie to write a story about, like to write a story about the person who made that movie, maybe make up a kid who meets that person. And so it was that conversation with Maurice Sendak that led me to make The Invention of Hugo Cabret. And so this is a still from that movie by George Méliès, A Trip to the Moon, where the rocket lands in the eye of the moon. And if you've read the book or seen the movie, you'll be familiar with this image. And when I was making the book, I went to Paris 3 times to research all of the places that Hugo and Méliès were going to be. And of course, a lot of the book takes place in a train station because that's where Méliès has his toy booth and that's where Hugo lives. So I took photographs like this. And then when I went back home to start working on the art, I turned these photographs into drawings like this. So you can see the relationship between the research I did and the drawings in my book. And I also watched a lot of old French movies. This is a still from a movie from 1931 called Under the Roofs of Paris. And 1931 is the year that Hugo takes place. So I took this still from the movie and I turned it into this drawing of Hugo and Méliès walking through Paris. So some of the drawings in the book actually come from the history of cinema. So if you were a movie expert, you might recognize some of these scenes because some of them are pretty famous. And then I met Remy Charlotte. And so you'll remember that Remy Charlotte made all of my favorite books when I was a kid. And a friend knew him and said he was in town. He lives in California and I was in New York at the time. And Remy Charlotte was in New York. So I got to meet my favorite childhood writer and illustrator. And he asked me what I was working on. And I told him how much I loved all of his books when I was a kid and how much I learned from him. And then I realized that Remy Charlotte looks just like George Méliès, one of the main characters in the book I was making. So I said, Remy, would you pose as George Méliès in my book? So every time you see a drawing of George Méliès in Hugo, the person you're actually looking at is Remy Charlotte, my favorite childhood writer and illustrator. And then, of course, they made a movie out of the book, which was very unexpected and very exciting. And I got to go to England where they were filming the movie, and they made everything from scratch. So they couldn't go to a real train station because people needed to use the train station, and movies take a long time to make. So they built a full-scale replica of the French train station on this soundstage in England. And so you could imagine how shocking it was for me to have made all of this up in my head. I've gone to do my research, I did my drawings, and I tend to work pretty small, so my drawings are very little. And then to walk into this train station that was being built to film my story. It was sort of like waking up from a dream and then finding out that the dream is real and you can walk through it. It was really incredible. So here it is, midway through, you can see all the construction, but they're making it look like a real train station. They also did a lot of special effects, some of which were with computers, but some of the special effects were done by actually building a miniature train. There's a train crash in the story, and I was told that they were building a miniature train to have the train crash. And I imagined a train like this big for the train crash, but I got invited to the studio where they had the miniature train do the train crash. So what you're looking at is a miniature facade of the front of the train station, but can you see how big this person is back here? So that's someone working on the train. This is supposed to, so this is a miniature version of the front of the train station, and here comes the train.
When we get it clear. Are you clear? Yep. Go ahead and play.
Action.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, here comes my favorite part.
Say your next line.
So that's my husband. And we were all so excited to watch that. It took the people who built that model 6 months just to make what you saw happen. And it happened in what, like 3 seconds. But they had to build the front of the train station. They had to build the 20-foot long train. They had to make sure it would go through the glass. And it was really incredible to get to watch it. So the movie was very closely based on all of the drawings in my book and my stories. So here's a drawing that I did of Paris at night, and this is a scene from the movie. So you can see that they really were trying to make the movie look like the book. Even a detail like this, where you can see the clock reflected in Méliès's eye, is used by the director, Martin Scorsese, in the movie. So he was really using my drawings like a storyboard to help him figure out what he wanted the movie to look like. This is Martin Scorsese with a copy of my book, showing the kids, Asa Butterfield and Chloe Moritz, how he wanted them to perform or act in this scene when Isabel falls in a big crowded scene. And so it was amazing that he always had a copy of my book. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen movies based on books that you like, and the movie is very different from the book, and maybe you don't like it as much. But I feel very lucky because Martin Scorsese and his whole team really loved my book, and they always had copies of the book with them when they were making the movie. So it's a very, very faithful adaptation, even though, of course, there are some differences. And so after I finished Hugo, I made a book called Wonderstruck. And this was inspired a lot by the history of deaf culture. And remember I told you when I was a kid, I had that book by Remy Charlip, Hand Talk Alphabet. This is the sign language for rainbow. So all of you can learn some sign language right now. You can do a rainbow. And I was really interested in the history of deaf culture and what it means to be born deaf and how the sign language alphabet developed. And in Wonderstruck, I wanted to tell a story all with drawings. And so I thought, well, if I tell the story of a deaf girl and I tell it all with pictures, it will parallel what her life is like, because when you're deaf, most of the information that you get is visual. Even the way that you communicate is visual. You see the sign language as people are signing to you or you're signing back to them. And so that was really where this began. And then what I do when I'm working on my story is, before I do any drawings, is I start writing down ideas for the story. I make lots and lots of lists. And then I type up the ideas for the story. Maybe I'll do some writing. And then I give it to my editor, just like those of you who are students right now, give your writing to your teacher. And then I'm sure some of you have teachers who like to write notes on your assignment to try to help you make it better. And you might have to write it a couple different times, trying to make it better and better. So what I'm going to show you now are some of the comments that I got from my editor when she was trying to help me to make the story in Wonderstruck better. And I want you to see how many comments I get from my editor. Ready? So she gives me a lot of comments. I don't know about you guys, but I'm guessing that some of you get very frustrated with all of the work you have to do, or maybe you even get annoyed with your teacher sometimes because you just want to be finished. Well, I just want you to know I get annoyed and frustrated all the time. And it's because it's hard. Like writing and making something good is hard work. Like we don't just sit down and make a finished book. These books take me 3 years to make. So, if I was to start a new book right now and you're in 3rd grade, I wouldn't finish the book until you were finished with 6th grade. And that whole time I would just be working on one book. And that's because I care about it and I want it to be as good as it possibly can. And so that takes time. And so, you don't need to take 3 years for everything. But what I'm saying is it's good to remember that even if you're frustrated, it's important to work as hard as you can to make what you're working on as good as it can be. So this is the way I do some of the drawings that I thought I would share with you now. So first I write a list of everything that I want to draw. And then I start doing these little tiny thumbnail sketches. They're all about this big. So they're very, very small. And then what I do is I cut them out and I Xerox them. Actually, first I Xerox them, then I cut them out. And then I glue them together to make little tiny books to see what happens when you turn from page to page. So remember I was talking about Remy Charloff's books, where when you turn the page, it's very exciting. Or if you think about where the wild things are, when you get to the wild rumpus, you turn the page and the story changes. So I make these little tiny books just to see what it's like when you turn the page from picture to picture to picture. So here I am, you can see they're just fast little sketches to see if this will work. And that helps me know if I'm then ready to do the finished art for the book that you would see when you get a copy. And so after I finished Wonderstruck, I decided to do another book with words and pictures called The Marvels. And this book is inspired by a very beautiful and strange house in London called the Dennis Sievers House. And it's sort of a museum, but when you walk inside, it doesn't look like a museum. It looks like a house that is still being occupied in the 18th and 19th century. So imagine if you really went back in time and walked through a door into somebody's house, what would it look like, right? Like there would be napkins on the table, there would be a glass with some wine in it, there might be some food on the table. You might go upstairs and there might be a fire ready to go. There might be a bowl of porridge. And when you walk through this house, you can see there's a pen, someone's just written a letter, there's a cup of tea. And when you walk through the house, there are sounds in the walls. So you can hear voices in other rooms, you can hear footsteps. So it really feels like you've fallen back in time. And so the book I wrote, The Marvels, is inspired by this house. And so remember I told you I did all those little sketches, then I make those little dummies, and then I said, when I'm ready to do the finished art that appears in the book, I'm ready to go. So this is the beginning of what my wall looks like in my studio when I'm beginning to do the finished art that's going to appear in the book. And The Marvels took me almost a year to do the finished art, meaning I just sat at my desk almost every day for a year doing these little drawings. And this is what that same wall looked like at the end of the year. And then I take all of these drawings off the wall, put them in a package, send them to my publisher, Scholastic, and they help me make it into the book that you could read. So Hugo, Wonderstruck, and The Marvels were all done separately, but when I finished them, I realized that they're kind of a trilogy, even though they don't have the same characters, they don't have the same setting, but they have some of the same themes. So the stories are about how people make their own families. Sometimes, like with Hugo, he's lost, his dad has died, he doesn't have anybody in the world, but then he finds new people who he can be safe with. And it's about, how we, make our own new family. Sometimes we're born into a family, sometimes we're adopted, sometimes we go out into the world and find people who can help us and protect us and who we can help and protect. So that idea connects all three of these books. And if you haven't read them, I hope that you like them if you do. And then I got to make some very different kind of book. And I actually wrote this with my husband, David Serlin. And this is called Baby Monkey, Private Eye. And it's about a baby monkey who solves crimes. And this is really for people who are just learning how to read, or anybody who likes baby monkeys, or private eyes, I guess. And so here is one of the first drawings of Baby Monkey's detective agency, where he's practicing and learning about crimes. Here you can see he's reading a book called Famous Jewel Crimes. And then his door opens, "Baby monkey, someone has stolen my jewels." And we turn the page and it says, "Baby monkey can help." And then the book is all about how Baby Monkey solves these crimes. But my husband is a teacher. He's a professor in college, and he writes a lot of books for grown-ups. And very often at the end of a nonfiction book for grown-ups, there's something called a bibliography. And some of the students who are watching today might be learning about what a bibliography is. And a bibliography is a list of all of the books that the author read to do research when they were making the book. So if you go to the back of Baby Monkey, Private Eye, there's a bibliography, but if you want to know a secret, David made all these books up and he made all these authors up. None of these people are real. So for instance, if you were interested in famous jewel crimes written by Louis Gergel, you could go to babymonkeyprivateeye.com, and there we have a biography for every one of the authors who wrote all of these books. And if you ever want to laugh, I think they're pretty funny. David made all of them up. And so I also got to do the 20th anniversary covers for Harry Potter. And so that was very, very exciting and very, very scary, because so many people love Harry Potter and the original covers are so beautiful. But I was really thrilled to be asked to do new covers and try to show how I would imagine the Harry Potter world looking. And I read the Harry Potter books, I loved them. And so I was very excited to get a chance to do my version of Harry Potter. So here you can see, I'm working towards the very end, there's Voldemort. And then when I finished the whole drawing, this is the drawing on my desk. So I did all 7 covers as one single picture. So you can start on the left side of the image, and you can see in the upper left-hand corner, Harry is a baby. And it goes all the way to the right, to the bottom right-hand corner. And this basically tells the entire story of Harry Potter. But I designed it so that you could separate each of the books into separate titles. So you can so each of the books has a separate cover that's sort of built into this one big image. So it was very, very fun and challenging to figure out how to do that. Oh, Paolo has a question.
Do you think literature and books will allow people to think of the pandemic in a different way?
Well, Paolo, that is a very good question. And that takes us to part 3, where I want to talk a little bit about the pandemic. So the fact that we're all here on this Zoom lecture through the San Diego Museum of Art is one of the good things and bad things about the pandemic, right? Because there are people who are joining us from all over the world, including me, who might not be able to be here today if it wasn't for Zoom. My mom is able to join us from New Jersey. You know, I know there's someone here from Philadelphia. There's lots of people from San Diego, but we're all able to be here together and have this shared experience, even though we're in different spaces. So, you know, I hope that everybody, you know, is feeling safe and healthy right now, because there's so many scary things that are happening in the world. And when the pandemic began a year ago, I got stuck in New York City and my husband got stuck in California, and we couldn't go fly to each other because we were afraid of getting on a plane. And so we each spent the first 3 months of the pandemic by ourselves. So I was in my apartment all by myself in New York for the first 3 months. And, you know, we were all so scared during those 3 months. And of course, we're still scared, but because everything was so new and we didn't know what was happening, it was a very strange time and very difficult time to be completely alone. And so every night at 7, you know, so many people in cities were able to go up to the roofs of their buildings or go to their windows and open them up and applaud for all the essential workers, like the doctors and nurses and the people who worked in the grocery stores and the food stores that remained open. And we would applaud for them every night at 7. And sometimes we would see neighbors who we knew, neighbors who we didn't know. And it was the one time when we were able to sort of safely see everybody up on the roof. And there was a family who lived across the street from me. And when the pandemic began, I was working on a lot of things. I was working on some books. I was working on many different things. But I was so scared and I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't make anything. Like I couldn't work, I couldn't draw, I couldn't write, couldn't leave the house. I just, you know, like so many of us, you know, I just felt scared and very stuck. But then there was a kid who in the family across the street, and I don't know if you can read what the sign says in the window, but it says, "Let's make art." And I thought that was such a good thing to remind the neighborhood and to remind us that we need to make art. And, you know, the title of this lecture is "I Am Here," because, you know, how do you tell someone I am here? How do you tell yourself I am here? Because sometimes it's really important to be able to say that proudly, to say it strongly, I am here. And for me, making art is a good way to say, I am here. It allows me to express myself. It allows me to learn things about myself I didn't know. And then sometimes I can also share that with other people, which is one of the great things about art. One of the great things about the Young Art Show at the museum is it allows you to share your ideas. And so I didn't know what kind of art I wanted to make because I didn't want to work on my books. I wasn't really ready to work on my books. But someone told me a quote from a poem that I found really inspiring. I was very depressed. I was really scared. And I don't know if any of you like to read poetry, but I love to read poetry. I find it can be very inspiring. And this is the quote from the poet W.S. Merwin. He wrote, "On the last day of the world, I would want to plant a tree." And it's an interesting statement because if it's the last day of the world, that means the next day there's no more world, right? So the tree would never get a chance to grow up because you don't just, trees take a really long time from seed to tree. Sometimes they take hundreds of years. But for me, this quote is all about being optimistic, being hopeful that even in the face of the end of the world, that he would want to do something that would be hopeful and about the future. And I found that really beautiful. So I don't know if you can tell what you're looking at, but this is actually a postcard from a collection that I've been keeping for a very long time of postcards from everywhere I travel and different museums that I go to. And I took a very sharp blade, like an X-Acto blade, and I cut into the postcard so that the words were revealed from cutting away into the postcard. So I think you can see like the scraps of all the letters around the edges. And so I really liked this because I've never really made anything like this before. And then the next day I wasn't feeling quite as optimistic. So I made this postcard because I felt like I needed to say help. And sometimes it's good to say how you're feeling, even if how you're feeling scares you a little bit or a lot. And so I made this one that said help. And then I made another one. Let me just get to that one. Hold on one second. Oh, there it is. And a friend of mine said to me that he felt like he was in a black hole. And so I thought, that really feel like, so many of us, I think, feel like that. So I drew a big black hole with ink in the middle of this picture. And then I started thinking about the circles and thinking about cutting into them. And so I started taking all of my postcards and making these images, and I don't even really know what they are. So you can see how when you look through them with the light behind them, you can see what I cut away. And you could probably do a version of this with scissors, or if you're a little older and can use a knife blade with supervision. It was a really interesting exercise because it started to feel like I was collaborating with the image in the picture. So me and the image, or the artist who made the image, were kind of having a collaboration. That's Elvis Presley. It's from when I went to visit Graceland. And this is a painting by Hans Holbein. And so you can see, like, I'm deciding what part of the picture I'm going to leave, what I'm going to take away. And so that was really, it felt really helpful to make these. I think I made about 48 of them before I ran out of postcards. And then a friend of mine gave me a flower. He left this on the front stoop. And this is an amaryllis. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with amaryllises, but I wasn't. I did not know that it was going to open up and turn into this incredibly beautiful flower. So I started drawing the amaryllis opening up, blossoming, and then the amaryllis started to die, because that's what happens to flowers. That's what happens to everything. It eventually dies. And I was looking at the amaryllis as it was dying, and I realized that it was beautiful just in a different way, right? Like, it's beautiful when it's open and it's bright red and it's vibrant. But look at the way that the veins become clear in this and the way the shapes curl. I thought it was really beautiful. And the color changes, becomes more purple. So I started drawing pictures of the amaryllis dying. And then I really loved the shapes and I loved the colors, but I didn't want to draw the amaryllis anymore. So I thought, what happens if I just paint colors and shapes that remind me of the amaryllis, that feel like the amaryllis? So this is a painting I did that I wasn't looking at anything. I wasn't looking at the flower. I just started painting shapes on a piece of wood. This is a square piece of wood. And I started adding color. And I don't know if any of you have ever tried making abstract art, because so many times we make art that looks like something, right? If you want to draw a chair, you can look at a chair and draw a chair. But sometimes abstract art can just be a painting of how you feel or an emotion inside of you. And so I was drawing abstract images. So this is another flower that my friend gave me. And this is a painting that I did. It's not a painting of the flower, but it's inspired by the flower. And then I did a blue, so that was a red painting and a yellow painting. So I did a blue painting that was inspired a little bit by clouds in the sky. But again, I just kept drawing and making colors with paint and seeing what kind of shapes came out of it. And then I eventually did a fourth one, which has all of the colors in the rainbow. And when I was making this, I could hear a little voice in my head saying, use all the colors you can, make it beautiful, make it draw what you most love. And I love all these colors. So I've never really done a painting like this before. You can see it's sort of strange, but it was really, really fun to draw. And so here they are, all four of them together. And then I finished and I felt like I needed to stop making abstract art for a little while. And so it was finally time for me to fly to California. 3 months had passed. They were opening the airports again. And I was able to go to the airport, which was very, very empty. So it felt pretty safe. And I flew to California, but I still had to quarantine for 2 weeks from my husband. And so we put a blanket over him so that I could give him a hug, because we hadn't hugged in 3 months. And so here's my husband underneath the blanket, staying very safe. And then, as you heard, he was awarded something called the Rome Prize. And in the middle of this pandemic, they were able to get us permission to fly to Rome to live here for 8 months. And so right now, I'm talking to you in the apartment that they gave us at the American Academy in Rome. We're at the top of the highest of the 7 hills of Rome. Night has just fallen here, so I put up some lamps around me so that you can see me. And right now we're in a red zone, but here red zone means everything is shut down because different countries use different colors. So we really can't leave our apartment right now unless it's for just buying food. But for the last 2 months, we've been able to walk around the city and really get to take in all of this art. And I haven't really done any drawing since I've been here because I've been looking at so much art. And so everywhere you go, there's an amazing amount of history. I think this is a really funny sculpture. Can you tell what this is? It's like a naked baby playing with a giant mask, and through the mouth, the baby is stealing an apple from a basket. And this is just one of the things that happened to be on a wall that I was walking by. And then you turn a corner and you look in, and suddenly there's like a beautiful, perfect, round little temple. And everywhere you go, there's a surprise. This is a statue of David from David and Goliath. And I love this statue. I've never seen it before. And I loved it because it looks like the statue is really breathing. Can't you imagine this kid, this young David who's just killed the giant Goliath, breathing, and his eyes are open really wide. And I love that even though it's made out of metal, it looks like he's really breathing. And then I saw these stained glass windows in a church, and I loved the blue, red, and yellow, which reminded me of the blue, red, and yellow paintings I had done when I was in quarantine. And this is a famous sculpture called the Laocoon. And you can see it's a guy and his kids being attacked by some snakes. But my favorite part is the way the snakes all interact. You see how they interact around the knee? So even though it's a big, famous, beautiful sculpture, my favorite part is this little tiny detail. And that's one of the things I've been thinking a lot about as I walk around Rome, is it's so big and it's so overwhelming. What are the little details that I find really interesting? And this is something you can do at home. You could do this at school. You can do it in your neighborhood. And because you see things every day, sometimes you don't really look at them. You see your house, you see your room, you see your school if you're going back to school right now, you see your front yard maybe, you see the sky, but what happens if you stop and you look for a detail that you've never looked at before, or really look at the shape of something? So that's one of the things I've been trying to do. So here's a very famous sculpture that you might see in a book or in a magazine, but because I was there, I walked around it, and look at this. This is a detail of that sculpture, but doesn't it look like an abstract image, kind of like what I was painting, the way the swirl is happening in the cloth and the light is behind it? And you would never know what this is, and you would never see a picture like this in a book, but I saw this because I was looking for a little detail. And so thinking about these little details has been very helpful and interesting while I've been here. Sometimes you see funny things when you're walking around. This is someone cleaning a sculpture, but doesn't it look like the sculpture is trying, the sculpture is trying to get away from the person cleaning it? Like he doesn't want her to be doing anything to his hand. This is called the Oculus in the Pantheon, which is a very famous building. So right now you're looking up into a dome, and the middle of the dome has a hole in it that's about 20 feet across, and it's open to the sky. So when it rains or snows, the rain or the snow comes straight into the building. And I love that you can stand in this building and look up and see the sky. It's a very, very beautiful element to me. And then this is just a part of a wall that I was walking past when I was walking around Rome. And it's really probably just some old bricks with some concrete and some plaster that's coming off. But I stopped and I looked at it and I thought, it looks, again, almost like an abstract picture. It looks maybe like a map. Like it looks a little bit like someone is trying to draw a map, but it's just an accident. It's just what happened from the weather wearing away at the stone. But stopping and looking at details like this is something that you can do even if you're at home. And so for part 5, I want to talk about a book that I made while I was in quarantine in the pandemic called Kaleidoscope. I had been working on another book for about 5 years. And after I finished all of those paintings that I had showed you, and I was ready to start thinking about going back to my books, I had this book that I was working on and it just wasn't coming together. The story wasn't working. I just didn't like it. So what I did was I went back to the writing. I had like 500 pages of writing and sketches. And I just thought to myself, just take all of the writing that you love and get rid of everything else. So I pulled sentences that I loved and paragraphs that I loved and ideas that I loved. And I turned each of them into a separate story and created a book out of those stories that they all come together, they all link together. So it makes a novel, but each of the stories really stands alone. But they all have a lot of things in common. This is the cover of the book. The book is going to be published in September of this year, so a couple months just after the summer. And it's 24 chapters. So it's sort of like 24 stories. And there's a first person narrator. There's a friend named James who the narrator really loves. And in many of the stories, there are things like butterflies and keys and locks and shipwrecks and angels that keep reappearing in a lot of the different stories. And that's why I called it Kaleidoscope, because when you look through a kaleidoscope at the whole world might look a little different to you, but the world still is the same. It's how you're looking at it that changes. And so and plus it's interesting because if you know Hugo and some of my other books, you know that I really like writing about keys and locks and secret doors and secret places. So there are things like that in Kaleidoscope as well. And it's got a very different type of drawing than in my other books. So in each chapter, there's only one drawing. And then you get to read the chapter and then move on to the next drawing. And it's really a secret what this book is about still, because it's not published. But I called my publisher and I told them about this special event that I was doing with the San Diego Museum of Art. And I asked if I could have permission to share with you one of the drawings and one of the stories, one of the chapters from the book. And they said yes. So you are the first people to hear this story. I'm a little nervous, to share it with you. It's very short, so it won't take very long to hear it. And then after I read it, we'll move to some questions and answers, Q&A, some questions and answers that you can put questions into the chat. But for now, I just want to share this story and this drawing with you. So this is the drawing that goes with the story, The Abandoned House. I'm going to take a little drink of water, and I'm going to begin to read it to you. The Abandoned House. We moved from room to room, unlatching the shutters over the windows. Cold, bright morning light cut through the dust in the air like knives. Vines had broken through the glass and spread across the walls, and it looked in places as if the wallpaper had come to life. There was a carpet of dried leaves on the floor, which crunched beneath our feet as we walked. Small animals heard our footsteps and scurried under the furniture. Spiders had spun vast, shimmering webs that flourished with the absence of human hands. It felt as if the border between indoors and outdoors had dissolved, and I'd never been happier in my life. James cleared out a fireplace and lit the fire, which was especially satisfying since his parents never let him touch matches at home. Soon, the room had warmed up, and we sat cross-legged on the leafy ground. "No one knows this place is here," James said. "It's ours now," I answered, picking up a pine cone and rolling its spiky edges across my palm. "Let's live here forever," James said. "Okay," I answered, as if it was true. "But don't tell anyone," he said. "Our secret," I answered. He put out his hand, and I gave him the pine cone. He tossed it into the fire. I looked at a broken clock leaning against one of the walls. The hands were lost and the glass was broken. The metal weights had fallen and the rusted chains that once held them in place were nearly indistinguishable from the wild tendrils that grew upward out of the floor. James saw me staring at the ruins of the clock. "I think it's broken," I said with a smile. "Maybe not," he said. "What?" I asked. "I mean, clocks tell time, right?" James said. He didn't take his eyes from the clock. "So don't you think this one is still telling time?" "That clock is definitely not telling time," I laughed. "Well, it used to tell time in seconds and minutes and hours," he said, "and it doesn't do that anymore. Now, it tells time in decades and centuries." "I don't understand what you're talking about," I said. "Most people think time is a machine that needs to be oiled and wound with a key," he said. "They think it's something you control and maintain, but maybe it's more wild than that. Maybe it's bigger and stranger. Maybe time is uncontrollable and endless and dangerous, like a forest eating a house." I looked around the crumbling room and tried to really understand what James was talking about. But time and James were mysteries to me, and I wondered if I'd ever figure either of them out. At that moment, James and I both heard something. There was an odd tapping on the other side of the room. We discovered it was coming from a tall cabinet that stood near the windows. The sound was like fingers drumming against the wood from the inside. On the doors of the cabinet, someone had long ago carved a great sailing ship rolling on an endless ocean. The tapping seemed to get louder. "Don't," I said, as James put his hand on the wooden knobs. He opened the doors. To our surprise, 100 blue butterflies burst all at once from the cabinet, their damp, broken chrysalises still hanging upside down from the undersides of the uneven shelves. The warmth of the fire and the unopened shutters must have woken them from their slumber, and they fluttered into the air with joy. And that's the end of the story. So thank you very much for listening. And before we go to the Q&A, I just want to say that here I am in Rome. This is an actual rainbow that I saw here in Rome from my window. And I just want to say thank you to everyone at the San Diego Museum of Art. I want to say thank you especially to Nicole Amaya, B. Barraza, Mary Grillo, David Miles, and also to, hold on, it's here. To everyone else who helped and participated, especially to all the kids who asked such great questions. And I'm so happy to be a part of this series and to be with you today. So thank you all very much. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Oh, there's the kids. And let me see, there we are.
Well, that was wonderful. This is just so special that we were able to be the first people to hear an excerpt from your book, which was beautiful. I'm sure everybody agrees, and just loved it. So thank you, Brian. This was a fascinating insight into your mind and how you create. And I can't wait till your book comes out. So for those of you who do want to get the book, you can pre-order it at Warwick's and bookstore, which is in La Jolla. And we encourage you to do that. But right now, I would love to ask you, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions about your process. But one of the things, being a museum docent, I was very captured by in your book, Wonderstruck, was your character Rose wanders into the Cabinet of Wonder. And those were the precursors to modern museums. And how did art museums inform or influence your art and creativity as a child and now?
Oh, that's such a good question, Mary. And I have always loved museums. I don't think I thought very much about the history of museums when I was a kid. What I thought about was how cool they were, right? Like I got to go to the Museum of Natural History in New York and see dinosaurs and see the dioramas with the animals inside them and the painted backdrops that looked real. I got to go to art museums and see famous artists whose work I had seen in books. I remember an art teacher I had in, I think 6th grade, gave me a book of Picasso's paintings and then took me to New York to see a Picasso show. And so all of the paintings that I had seen in the book, I saw on the walls of the museum. And so it felt like I owned the paintings because I already knew them, right? So a good teacher can really help you, and a good docent can really help you feel connected with the art and the objects in a museum. So as a kid, it was that excitement of being around cool, exciting, beautiful, strange, interesting things that were things that I couldn't see in my everyday life, right? Like I could see a book with photographs of a famous painting, but I couldn't see a real famous painting until I went to a museum. Or I could read about dinosaurs, but it's very different to read about dinosaurs than it is to go to a museum and actually stand underneath a dinosaur skeleton. And so as a kid, that was always something I really loved. And I remember going to the Museum of Natural History, the wolf diorama was my favorite because they made it look like it's nighttime. If you haven't read Wonderstruck, the wolf diorama is an important part of the story, but it's also a real diorama at the museum. So if you go to New York and visit the museum, you can see the wolf diorama. And I loved that it had this nighttime moon effect, which was really, extraordinary. And it looked like the wolves were running through the snow at night. And I think it really wasn't until later, when I was a grown-up, and maybe even when I was with my husband, David Serlin, that I really started thinking more about the histories of museums. Because anything that you look at, like right now, you could look at anything in your house. Here's a candle, here's a cup, there's a lamp over here, there's a rug over there. All of these things have a history. There has been some version of them for sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. there wasn't electricity 1,000 years ago, but there were oil lamps or fires. And that's part of the history of the electric lamps we have in our house. So thinking about these histories became really interesting to me, and thinking about how museums share these histories with people who come to visit was very exciting. So there's a great book called Mr. Wilson's Cabinet of Wonders for any older students or adults who are interested in the history of museums, that talks a lot about the earliest things that became museums. And then my husband teaches about the history of museums. So one of the great things about being married to a teacher and a researcher is sometimes I could just ask him what he knows about a topic. It's sort of like, I always joke, it's like I'm living with Google. And so I can just ask him anything that I need to know. And so I started becoming very interested in the history of museums. And really in a lot of ways, anytime you collect things, and I'm sure most people watching this right now have a collection. Like you might just collect baseball cards, or you might collect dolls, or you might collect shoes, who knows? You might collect souvenirs from when you used to travel places. You know, there's all sorts of things. You might collect straws, who knows, right? But if you collect something and decide how you're gonna lay it out in your room or in your house, that means you're kind of starting a museum, and you're doing the same job that a museum curator does when you collect things and decide what you're going to share and what you're going to show. And so I love collecting things. I've always collected things. And so I have, you know, dozens, I have a collection of collections. Like there are so many collections in my house. And so that was really part of what got me excited about writing Wonderstruck, because one of the reasons I like to make books is I get to become curious about something and then dive into it and do a huge amount of research and write a story that hopefully will then make the reader curious about those things as well.
Wow. Okay. So we have a question from Miss Emily's class. What piece of art are you most proud of?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Right, like when we're making art, right? Like how do we all feel while we're making art? Like I'm guessing that some of you might be very proud of it right when you're finished because it looks like how you want it to look. You imagine it in your head and you feel very proud of it. Sometimes we were talking earlier about sometimes it doesn't go well. Then you have to work really hard. And then, you know, sometimes you might even throw something away because you're not happy with it. Like when I was doing those paintings that were different colors that I was showing you, I actually did one that was green, but I hated it so much that I painted over it all white and started again because I just didn't like it. And then when I'm finished, when I finally feel like I've made a work of art that is finished and it looks like the way I look, I feel proud of the fact that I've made it, that it looks like something usually different from anything I've made before, because I'm always trying to learn new techniques and trying to be better. So, you know, I can look at my books and think, you know, there's some drawings that I maybe like more than others. There's a drawing in Hugo of Hugo's face that I particularly love, the way his expression came out. But generally, I don't finish something unless I really do feel proud of it. So the work that I share with you, the work that's in my books, is work that I'm very proud of. And even those paintings, again, that I was sharing with you that I did in the pandemic, when I made those, I didn't share those with anybody. I didn't put them on social media. I didn't show them to my friends for the most part. I just did them for me, because sometimes you need to just make art for yourself, and that's important too. And now that some time has passed and I've thought about them, I like sharing them now because they're part of a bigger story. And that's why I decided to share them with you today, because they're part of the story of the beginning of my experience in the pandemic. So I'm proud of them now as what they are. And I'm proud of the fact that they're part of the story of the beginning of my experience in the pandemic, because we all have our unique stories from the pandemic, which is still unfolding. But thank you, that's a good question.
So we have a trend happening here where Ostensibly, we would like the questions to be in the chat forum. However, some of our younger participants are raising their hands. So if it's okay with everyone, I'll call on a few of the younger people and make sure to unmute yourself before you ask your question. Raina, you have a question?
It's a kind of a comment, but you said about that collection thing that just made me think of go to Idlewild and get some souvenirs, like a snake glass thing. That was art, and I kind of like that.
Oh, that's great, Raina.
One day passed, I asked my grandpa, can I do art with glass? And he said, it can't just happen right away. So he gave me I got a piece of paper and I drew what I wanted to do on the piece of paper with the glass.
And then, so you planned ahead. Your grandpa talked to you about how sometimes you have to plan. That's a little bit like what I was talking about before with the little sketches that I do. So you plan, and then he helped you do the work on the glass. So I think that's really fantastic. And I think like what you were saying before about, oh, do you have one more thing that you want to say there?
He did not do the glass yet. We're still working.
We're still waiting. Okay. So when it's time, you'll be prepared. And so like, I also like, I have lots of little collections I was telling you about. So this is, I've been collecting these little tiny tourist sculptures. This is actually a place called the Spanish Steps, which is here in Italy. I bought this little tiny Pietà, which is a sculpture by Michelangelo. So I have lots and lots of little tiny, I collect like little tiny nutshells that I like, that I find outside that look interesting. So you can really make it, I found a bead on the street that I thought was kind of cool. And so I have this collection right behind my computer here is a big collection full of things that I like. And so I hope that might inspire you to collect other things as well. Thank you, Raina.
Yeah, also
Raina, we're gonna move on to Tess, if that's okay.
Bye, Raina.
Bye-bye, thank you. Tess, you've had your hand.
Yeah, my question is, what's your favorite color?
Oh, what an interesting question. What's my favorite color? You know, it kind of changes. I've for a long time, I've really liked orange. I think orange is a really beautiful color, but then I also like blue very much, which on the color wheel is actually the opposite of orange. There's a really beautiful color wheel, if you're not familiar with that, that shows how all the colors go together. And so I really like blue, but I think what I really like is looking at how different colors look when they're combined with each other. So that's why I like looking at paintings and looking around in real life and seeing what happens when different colors are near each other. What happens if you take an orange leaf and put it on a green lawn? It might look different than if you take the orange leaf and hold it up against the blue sky or put it against a red fire hydrant. The color and the combinations are really interesting to me. Do you have a favorite color, Tess?
Purple.
Purple, I like purple very much. Thank you for your question, Tess.
Okay, we have a question here from Alexandra. Is Hugo meant to be steampunk?
Is Hugo meant to be steampunk? So anybody who doesn't know what the term steampunk means, it's a description of a style that includes both Victorian era technology, like things that are made out of brass and look like they could have been real in the Victorian era in the late 18th, early 19th century. No, late 19th, early 20th century, but are also kind of science fiction. Like maybe imagine if like Sherlock Holmes could get into a spaceship that he made and go to outer space. Like what would that spaceship look like? It would be made out of things that were only available in the Victorian era, and maybe brass and leather and wood and screws, but it would still be kind of science fiction. So that's steampunk. And I've had a couple people ask me if Hugo is steampunk, because one of the things that's very popular in steampunk is clockworks. and things that that you wind up and work the way a clock works. And because Hugo has an automaton, and it's a lot about clocks, sometimes people who love steampunk really like those elements of Hugo. But I would say that Hugo is not steampunk because Hugo actually is not science fiction. Like everything that happens in Hugo really can happen. Like there really are automatons you can wind up that can write poems and draw pictures and dance and sing. And there really are clocks and clockworks that can do all of those things. So what I would say is that me and Hugo and steampunk all love the same things, right? Because I also love all of those elements. But even though Hugo isn't steampunk, I bet Hugo would really love steampunk.
Okay. All right, Maria, you've been raised. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, Brian. I don't know if you remember me, but I actually had been to all of your meet and greets for the past a long time, and this is the most recent one we took in 2018.
It's so good to see you again.
Hi. I just wanted to say that you have inspired me to do art as a major in college, and now I'm going to UC Santa Cruz for
Oh my
art.
God, congratulations. Can everyone
Thank
give
you.
That's wonderful.
an applause? That is so fantastic. And you know, and I think for me, as someone who loves art and loves telling stories and sharing my stories with people, right? Because I make a book and I mostly work by myself, but I have people who help me, and my husband helps me and my editor helps me, but mostly it's by myself. And then the book sometimes gets made into thousands and thousands of copies that go all over the world, right? Some of them get translated into other languages. Some of them go to places that I might never visit. And people get to read my stories who I may never meet. And so what's nice is sometimes some of those readers, like you, Maria, I get to actually meet and I get to actually talk to, and then you get to actually tell me that that inspiration came from these books, the way the inspiration I had came from Remy Charlip, and I was able to tell Remy Charlip how much I loved his books and how much they inspired me. And so I now feel like I'm a part of a ladder, right? Like you and I are now part of a longer chain. You're now the newest chain, the newest link on the chain, right? And I bet Remy Charlip had people who inspired him, who maybe he got to meet or he got to know. So he inspired me, I thanked him, and then I made books, and now you're thanking me, and maybe one day, I'm sure, someone will be able to say to you that you've inspired them as well. So thank you so much, Maria, and good luck.
Thank you. Say hi to David for me.
I will.
I have I'm going to combine a couple questions from Courtney and Ray. Courtney would like to know, is there a specific book that you would like to see made into a movie and why? And then related to that, Ray asks, when they made Hugo, it was a little different than the book. And did you like the changes that they made?
So I think those two questions might need three. Well, no, I guess, is the question one of my books that hasn't been made into a movie, or
Yes.
any book?
Yes,
Oh,
a book you would like to see made into a movie.
so these are very good questions. And actually, Wonderstruck was made into a movie. That was a movie that was directed by Todd Haynes, and I got to write the screenplay. Julianne Moore is in it, a young deaf actress named Millicent Simmons, who we discovered, who went on to star in the movie A Quiet Place. And that was really exciting. And now we're beginning to talk about making The Marvels into a movie, which I'm very, very excited about. But there are other books of mine, you know, and even ones that I didn't write, that other people illustrated, that other people wrote that I illustrated, that I think would make great movies. I illustrated a book by Pam Munoz-Ryan that I didn't show earlier called Riding Freedom. And it's based on the true story of a woman in the 1800s, when women were not allowed to vote in the 1800s. And so she disguised herself as a man, got a job on a ranch riding, or, as a stagecoach driver, which is not a job that women were allowed to do, but nobody knew she was a woman. And so she lived her life as a man, got all these, had these amazing adventures, was very brave, very strong, and she voted because everyone thought she was a man. So she is possibly the first woman who ever voted in America. And her name was Charlotte Parkhurst. The book is great. It's called Writing Freedom, as I mentioned. And I bet that would make a really good movie too. And the second part of the question is about the changes that were made to Hugo. So I was talking earlier that it's a very faithful adaptation, but there are some changes from the book to the movie. And it's interesting because sometimes when we read a book, we really do want it to be exactly like the book. But now that I've been writing some movies myself, you really feel the difference in the way the story is told. Because in a book, right, you sit down, you can open it, you can close it, you can go away from it for a little while, you could come back. You really set the pace of the reading of the book. But with a movie, even though now if we're watching it at home or on a computer, we can pause, normally you sit down in a movie and it all just happens in about an hour and a half or 2 hours. And so the way the story is told really does change the way some of the story needs to get told. And so there are maybe one or two small changes that, like maybe I would have done it different, but really the changes that they made make sense for the adaptation of the story from book to movie. And I love it. Like I love the movie of Hugo. And now the more that I've watched it, the changes I've come to really like. Even Sacha Baron Cohen plays the station inspector, and he's like a crazy, funny comedian. But in the book, the part is not funny. Like he's like the bad guy. And he still is pretty scary in some parts of the movie, but he also does a lot of things that are really funny. And at first I was like, why is he doing funny things in the middle of this movie? Because it's supposed to be scary. But then I realized that he's acting a little bit like an old silent movie where there were characters called Keystone Cops who were like very funny policemen running around. And I was like, oh, that's kind of what he's doing, is acting a little bit like he's in one of those old-fashioned silent movies that Hugo and Hugo's dad would have watched. And so I've come to really like that as well. And then when I'm writing a movie of my own book, when I'm writing the screenplay, sometimes I have to take things out that are really painful, that worked in a book, but just don't work on screen. And I'm also writing a musical. I'm writing a musical of Hugo. And so Hugo's gonna sing, and there's gonna be a big chorus, and the whole train station is gonna, be part of the musical. And so thinking about why this character sing and what the songs are, it's very challenging because some things, again, have to change so that it works in the right way for a musical. So there's always going to be something that's different.
Okay, great. We'll go with a few more questions, 2 or 3. Naomi asked early on, are there ever, and hang on, I see you, Duncan, I'll get to you. Asked early on, do you ever get discouraged after seeing someone else's drawings?
That's a really good question. Jealousy, right? You ever feel jealous? And jealousy is a very complicated, difficult emotion to deal with. And of course, we've all been jealous of something at some point. But hopefully, we eventually realize that it actually doesn't help anything, right? What does being jealous help you do, right? I'm someone who likes to try to think about a problem and then try to do something positive, try to fix it. And it doesn't always work, but I try. And I've noticed that jealousy, the only thing it does is it makes you feel bad. And that's not really particularly helpful. So one of the things I try to do is think about what it is that I'm looking at that I might have been jealous of, and what is it that they're doing that I can't do? And maybe maybe that's something exciting. Maybe that's something to say congratulations to them, or to say like, wow, like what you're doing is really hard or really challenging. And you could, like, sometimes I think like, wow, I wish I could do that. Like I know lots of artists who I think draw, how do I say this? I think there are a lot of artists who draw better than I do. And sometimes they can make something more realistic. Sometimes they can make something that looks more cartoonish, but more fun. And so I realized eventually, and I think for a while I would think like, oh, I wish I could draw that realistically, or I wish I could draw that fun. But I think eventually I realized, wait a second, I draw the way I draw, and nobody else can draw that way, right? So, and look at that, there, Raina's showing us something. I don't know if you can see Raina on your screen, but she's got a beautiful drawing there that I couldn't do. Tess has some drawings up that I couldn't do. And so there's one by Primrose, but I see the name Primrose. I don't know if that's the name, but that's what's on your screen.
This is what the
But if everyone would just look for a moment at your, I don't know if you're looking at it in the grid form, but if you're looking at the grid form of the Zoom call, a lot of the kids are holding up works of art. And there's no reason to be jealous, because what you can do is something nobody else can do. And I've heard people who are famous artists be jealous of other people, like that say like, oh, I wish I was like that artist. And I think to myself, but they can't do what you're doing. Like why is that? Why do we feel that way sometimes? And so now I think to myself, I most love work that I can't do. Like if I see an abstract painting that is nothing like what I do, or an illustration in a book that's completely different from me or more realistic, I love that because I can't do it, because it's different from what I do. And then I think to myself, what is it that I can do, and how can I make what I do better than anything I've ever done? I'm not trying to make something better than the other person. I'm trying to make something better than I've ever done. And that's always my goal when I'm making a book or making a work, is how can I do something that's better than the work I did before? So that's my answer.
Okay. Duncan, do you have a question? And then I have one more.
Oh, I was wondering, Brian Selznick, I don't know how to pronounce it, but did you turn your computer around so we could see your collection maybe? I mean, I can do it.
I knew that when I mentioned I had a collection directly behind the computer, somebody was going to ask to see it. So let me see if I'm allowed to share my screen again. Oh no, I don't want to share my screen. That's the wrong thing. I want to just walk with it, I guess. I was trying to see what the best way to do this is. So it might be a little dark, but can you see?
Oh, yeah.
So, there we go. So there are more of these little tourist buildings, like these each cost like $1. And then stones that I find, I might have to return these to Rome, because you might not be allowed to really take pieces of pottery out of, this might be like 6,000 years old. So, but I found it like on the floor. And so this is a piece of a tree that I really love, these umbrella pines that are really beautiful. They look like pine trees that are actually like turned into umbrellas. And then I found this children's toy at a flea market that I thought was really cool. This is a pine cone that fell outside my neighborhood. This is a funny little bird that I bought in a antique store. And oh, I have a little sculpture of the Pope, because he lives right down the street from me. And so I have some hourglasses so I can see the time passing. Because I was talking earlier about, I was reading to you the book, The Abandoned House, where time feels like it just like falls apart, right? Like time just feels like it's broken. And I think that's kind of how we're all feeling from the pandemic. And that's part of why I wrote that story, was because I was feeling like time had broken. And so I wanted to write that for that element of the story. And so now I really like also having things that, show the time passing, like a hourglass. So I have a collection of hourglasses as well. So I hope you can see some of that.
Well, thank you very much. That was interesting. So I have question about how do you know when a story is worthy to be shared with the world? And then related to that, in which way does the writing inform the drawing or vice versa?
So in terms of sharing a story, the way I feel about it is I have to feel like the story is told in the way that, this is going to sound weird, but the way it wants to be told. Like sometimes it's like you're going inside the story and you're trying to find where it wants to go. Because right, we're the people who make up the stories. So I can make anything happen, right? Like we can make up anything. But sometimes if you do one thing, it might feel more interesting than another thing, or it might feel better to make something else happen. And sometimes it begins to feel like the stories are talking to you. And that doesn't always happen, and it's a little weird. But for me, I feel like when I have a sense that the story is what I want it to be, like whether it's like with Hugo, like I had to work out the whole plot, right? Because there's all these twists and turns and things that happen that are surprising. So I had to figure out how to set up all the twists and turns. I had to figure out what was going to happen to Hugo. So that was, so that was one thing. And then, like I said, that took me 3 years to figure out all of those elements of the story. And then I felt like I was ready to share it with everybody. With Kaleidoscope, it's stories like the one that I read to you, where each one takes place in a different place, in a different year, with kind of related but different characters. And so, each of them set up a different idea, and they ask a different question, right? So what is the feeling when time breaks? Or how do we think about what a clock is? Or did the invention of clocks really affect how we think about time? And then when I feel like that story does that, then I feel like I'm ready to share it. But that's very personal, right? That's really up to each of us to decide when that moment is. And sometimes, again, like sometimes maybe there's something just for you, something that you're making that's just for you. But then eventually, I know that I very much like to share. But there's things, like I said, that I haven't shared that are just for me. But then again, like that might change. And one day something that I made for me might be something that I eventually want to share. And was there a second part to that question?
Yes. How does writing versus drawing inform your work?
Right. So I always think of the story first, right? Sometimes I'll think about like how I want to use drawings, or that I know I'm going to, illustrate a book. But usually I think about the story and what the story is. And then I figure out how pictures could help tell that story. And so, for instance, like when I was making Hugo, it originally was just going to be a 120-page novella with maybe one drawing a chapter, sort of like what I did for Kaleidoscope. But I realized that Hugo is actually about movies and silent film and all of these things that are very visual. So I thought it would be interesting to try to tell the story of Hugo with sections of pictures, sort of like the Wild Rumpus and Where the Wild Things Are, that would help the story maybe feel like a silent movie, right? Because silent movies tell the story mostly visually. And then with Wonderstruck, I actually knew that I wanted to do words and pictures separate for 2 different stories. But then, like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to, I had the idea to tell the story of a deaf character with pictures because it's visual, and a deaf person would experience a lot of the world visually because that's how sign language works. It works by looking at it because you can't hear people speaking. And so it always comes from the story and the characters. And that's why Kaleidoscope originally wasn't going to be illustrated, because the main character in Kaleidoscope, did you notice that I was saying James and I went into the abandoned house? The main character is just known as I. And so when you read the book, if you read it out loud and you say, James and I go into the abandoned house, Maybe it could be you, you know, so, and it doesn't say if the narrator is a boy or a girl, or anyone in between. It could be anybody that you imagine in your head. And so I didn't want to draw something because so much of the story takes place in your imagination. But then I thought, you know, maybe one drawing for each story that shows something that's not the people, that could help us imagine the world would be a good idea. So that's why Kaleidoscope is illustrated differently from the other books.
Well, thank you so much. It looks like we could probably go another half hour with questions, but we will not. And I want to thank everybody for submitting questions. Brian, this was fascinating. And thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Bea now.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary, for that great job of curating all those questions from all those lovely individuals, and especially from the kids. And I just want to say, you know, the kaleidoscope is just such an interesting concept because, like memory, you look at something and then it breaks apart and then you get to put it back together again. So I can't wait to read the book and see what you've done with that art. And please, everyone, join me in thanking Brian. You can unmute and clap or just clap. Thank you so much for being here. There we go. There are the kids. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, everybody's saying goodbye. Bye-bye to the kids. Bye. A cacophony of students. And I just want to say goodbye. Thank you all for being here. We will hope to see you for the next lecture on April 16th at 10 o'clock with a San Diego native painter and tapestry designer, John Nava. Okay, one happy goodbye, kids. Bye.